Hello, my name is Brian Wrozek. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Optiv, and I'm joined today by my coworker, James Turgal, and we're going to talk about ransomware. This is a hot topic. I get asked questions all the time about ransomware, so I thought who better than to share some tips and tricks with me than James. James, why don't you give us a little bit about your background, because it is fascinating after we talked earlier today.
Thanks, Brian. And this is a great opportunity for us to kind of share thoughts about ransomware. I just joined Optiv about 8 weeks, 9 weeks ago. Prior to that, 3.5 years as a managing director with Deloitte. But prior to that was 22 years with the FBI. So I've been working cyber investigations since the 2002, 2003 era. I've worked the Chinese, Russian, North Korean cases. And so I've worked this mostly throughout my career, actually designed and delivered technology to a global FBI footprint when I was the head of HR. And I culminated my career with the FBI as the executive assistant director for global information and technology and the FBI's CIO.
Well, it's great to have you part of Team Optiv. So welcome, and let's get started and talk a little bit about ransomware. So first things first is, how in the world did ransomware become such a prolific and successful attack vector?
So, I've worked a ton of ransomware cases during my FBI career. And from being on the technology side, this is all about, right, the three things that we always say, right? It's people, it's process, it's technology, right? It's all those things. And not to be a ransomware geek, but right, the very first ransomware case that I know existed actually happened in 1989. It goes all the way back to the late 80s. Where it was an actual researcher who carried out an attack by distributing 20,000 floppy disks to other researchers in 90 different countries. And those floppy disks actually contain malware. And that was the very first one that locked it. As I have seen throughout both my investigative career with the FBI, working cyber, and then as the CIO, right, employees are the targets, right? This type of malware, right, it works, and that's why it is absolutely so prolific and has become such a successful attack, because you can do it in so many ways, right? You can do it in what's called smishing, right, SMS text. I've worked cases of what's called malvertising, where you've got ransomware embedded in advertising links. And then the big one that I've seen a number of cases in the last few years of my FBI career was really in the social media part, where you're actually using social media, Facebook Messenger, for example, to embed ransomware to unsuspecting victims. And early on, I think it was very much an organized crime group, but now the Chinese, the Russians, right, the nation states are really jumping on it.
Yeah, it definitely works. I mean, I was reading a report over the weekend from Cybersecurity Ventures, and they were estimating that the global cost of ransomware could reach 20 billion this year in 2021. That's a staggeringly large number.
Yeah, and honestly, if you track what the Internet Crime Complaint Center, right, that the FBI runs, there is an uptick of somewhere in the neighborhood of 500% every year where this increases. And I even to the point where I'm actually seeing some numbers where on the dark web there's a 2,500% increase in the types of variants out there of ransomware every year. I mean, that's staggering.
You would think by now that executive management would realize this isn't just a technology problem. This isn't just something for the cybersecurity team to handle, but this is an all-out corporate crisis. I mean, this is an all-hands-on-deck type incident, and I just don't think that companies yet are prepared or even equipped to really handle a ransomware attack adequately.
No, and I've one particular case that I think is really telling, and it's kind of a group of cases. Ransomware is not just an external threat. Yes, I've seen it where you are absolutely, being attacked externally from nation states using a variety of different methods, right? But I've also seen Chinese and Russian cases where they're actually, scanning social media using keyword scanners to try to determine the employee base of a particular company that they want to attack. And once they determine, employees, right, you get some employee who, posts on Facebook or Instagram, I had a really terrible day today, and I hate my company, and right, my boss is an idiot, and right, there's keyword scanners out there that if the organizations, the nation states want to attack you, they're now keyed in on you, right? And now that employee starts getting hit with all types of emails with embedded malware and ransomware, trying to get that employee to actually open those personal emails on company systems, or in some cases, actually recruiting those employees as, from the nation state viewpoint. So you're right. I mean, it's shocking that that companies haven't figured out, how to deal with this, but also that it's not just external, right? This is an insider threat as well.
So, James, I think another less talked about contributor to the problem is this unintended consequence of cyber insurance. Now, I'm not blaming the insurance companies, but I suspect that there are companies out there that are more willing to quickly decide to pay the ransom, knowing that, hey, the insurance company is going to cover the cost. I also think the attackers are counting on this dynamic. They can drive up the price of their demand, and they may even be more willing to give you the decryption key. So this whole dynamic of raise the price, insurance pays, just keeps feeding itself over and over.
No, Brian, you're absolutely right. And I've actually worked some cases where you've got some less sophisticated attackers where you can actually track, right, where they're going. When you do the forensics afterwards, you can actually track where they've gone and laterally move through your networks. And I've actually worked a case where they were specifically targeting any files that had to do with cyber insurance, right? That's what they were looking for, right? Because that's, to them was, okay, if they have cyber insurance, that's going to change their whole philosophy about, how long they were going to stay there, or what kind of, work they were going to put in, cruising through and taking the time to go through this network. So you are 100% right.
So we could talk for hours about how big of a problem this is and all that, but let's sort of look at it from, okay, we know it's a problem, but now what are the best steps that an individual or a company can take to prevent ransomware and the bad side effects? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my last 3 years with Deloitte was really spent with boards of directors and audit committees, and that's why I was brought into Optiv, was to build that cadre of interactions with our board of directors, with our clients' board of directors. And so, you and I know from working this and being in IT, right? The old adage, right? You can't protect what you can't see, right? And there's a lot of, to me, it's really critical. And I learned this the hard way as the CIO of the Bureau, right? Understanding what your environment looks like, right? Getting rid of the shadow IT, getting rid of the shadow data within your environment, and truly understanding, what that means. I've worked, a particular case where, you've got a company who is moving from, data centers to a cloud environment, right? With, and doing all the things as to why you'd want to do that, right? More security and trying to, mitigate that risk and share that risk across both your organization and the cloud environment provider. But this one particular company left one data bank, right? One server bank, right? In their headquarters, right? In some room that, after they moved to the cloud, nobody ever went in there. But that was still connected to the network, right? It was still an endpoint. And it was one of those things that was still vulnerable, allowed that entry point, and allowed, malware and ransomware to shut the company down. So honestly, I mean, we talk about it all the time, and you mentioned it earlier. Can't believe that companies and IT groups haven't figured out the need to do the regular blocking and tackling, right? But understanding, right, what are, using tools like predictive analytics to shorten the time of understanding what's going on in your networks. I ask questions, when I'm doing investigations about this, do you truly understand how and what is going on your networks, and can you monitor it, right? Understanding what zero trust is, and then honestly understanding the difference between you know uh, both what is data resiliency, right, and what's the difference between traditional disaster recovery efforts and being technically resilient, right? Those are two totally different things, and making sure that your networks are that. And there's a ton of tools out there that we can provide to do that based on your environment.
Yeah, and a lot of the endpoint security tools and even some of the network security tools, now they actually come with pre-built ransomware controls and protections that you can enable. And so that's a good point. Is take advantage of what's being offered and what's being provided. Many times we have things deployed and we move on to the next project and we don't go circle back and take advantage of all the features that are coming out in what we already have deployed.
Right. And it's also understanding as you're moving along your transformation journey, right? You're either adding tools or you're adding a business application. I've also seen a number of instances where you add some kind of off the shelf application or some type of software, and guess what? When those coders designed it, they designed it with a default of where the data that's generated from that application is going to go, right? And if you don't change that, or you go in and don't realize that it's you believe the data is going one place and the code default actually sends it to another place, you now, within your network, you're now either not securing both, right, enough, and or you have no idea where that data is going. And I've actually worked cases where again, brilliant, well-intentioned IT professionals, right, but the one little detail of not realizing where the default code was sending data is what was the problem.
Yeah, and speaking of details, that's interesting. I mean, we all know you have to back up your data, right? If you want any chance of recovering from a ransomware attack, you need to have your data backed up. But how many people have actually gone back to their backups and practiced restoring those backups? And are those backups clean? And are they isolated from the corporate environment? It's when you said that, what triggered my thought is paying attention to those details.
Yeah, and especially the being able to understand, does your backup, when one of the things that we strove for, that I did as the CIO of the bureau, was really understanding failover capability, right? We were reducing the number of data centers from 7 down to 2, right? But that was East Coast, West Coast. So I had the ability at any given time, and we practiced it. And it's painful to start, but we actually practice East Coast, West Coast failover capability, right? So within 45 minutes, I could go to a completely different data center, right? That was walled off and actually do that.
Yeah, practice. That's really good advice. In fact, we'd love to prevent ransomware from getting on our systems. And you and I both know you're not 100%. There's no way you can stop, every attack. So let's talk about how an individual or an organization, what should they do if that event happens and they're actually impacted by ransomware? What do they do?
Well, I think the best advice, and this is twofold in my opinion, you need to not panic and work the problem. You get a lot of companies that, and we just mentioned it 30 seconds ago, practice, right? If you actually practice this stuff, and you would understand how the organization works. But actually having, data loss recovery programs and actually having a backup plan and a cyber focused crisis response plan, and then working that plan. But the other big question, and I always get asked this from my FBI days, right? The biggest question is, do you pay the ransom? Right? And when I sit there and I meet with boards and I meet with audit committees, and I always ask a show of hands, right? So who in the room has a Bitcoin wallet? And they look around at each other, and some of them are like, "What?" And maybe you get one or two hands, and then I ask, do any of you know how to get a Bitcoin wallet? Yeah, same number, right? Maybe one or two. It's not just a question of working the problem. It's a question of could you even pay the ransom if you wanted to from an organizational standpoint? And I've worked, of all the ransomware cases I've worked throughout my career, I can tell you that three things happen, right? When you're a victim of ransomware, right? You either pay the ransom and receive the decryption key from the bad guys, and it unlocks your data. Or two, you pay the ransom, you never receive a decryption key because they never intended to give you one. And then there's a whole host of cases in the last few years where you're paying the ransom, you're getting a decryption key, it doesn't unlock your data, but it installs new malware. Right. And so you've gotta have this holistic view of both working the problem, having those backups, using the third party organizations out there to help you work through this, but honestly preparing yourself, because as you said, it's gonna happen.
So you can't just write a check. Yeah.
Right.
So that's interesting. And with that thought in mind, I would think that these companies would be more willing to call in third-party experts, or at least bring in somebody who can, help them with setting up a Bitcoin account. These seasoned incident responders and forensic professionals who can, even negotiate with the attacker to try to, come up with a better price, I would think. I mean, doesn't hurt to ask, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that is, and they understand, the bad guys, and I've interviewed these guys, right? They know that you're not they want you to interact with them, right? Because if you just, go, silent, if you're running silent on them and you're just trying to use your own backups and everything else, the more that they interact with you, the longer they have you strung along, right? They want that interaction. And so being able to utilize the third party groups, but important part about that, you have to have those relationships ahead of time, right? You have to have set up, right? What are the SLAs for the response, and do you need outside attorneys, right? An external law firm? Do you need a communications firm? Businesses are great at doing business, right? But the one thing that I learned in 22 years with the FBI is how to run a crisis, right? And running a crisis, right, is totally different than your normal business operations. And that's why businesses fail at this, because they just don't know how to run the crisis.
Yeah, they not only do they need to practice, but bring in somebody who does that for a living. I mean, I'm horrible at home improvement, or I can't fix a leaky faucet or install a ceiling fan. So I call somebody who can do that.
Right.
The same is true in the digital world. Bring somebody in who can help you with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, after the crisis, it's not like, glad that's over, time to go back to business as usual. The other thing I like to counsel folks on is do a very thorough post-incident review, because you want to make sure that whatever vulnerabilities that you had that allowed that attacker to get in or allowed that ransomware to get on your systems, you want to make sure that that's covered, right? You want to mitigate that so that you can't be compromised again through that same avenue, and then really use that as a learning opportunity. Yeah. And improve your overall security program and figure out what controls do you need to put in place, or what procedures need to be implemented, so that if it should happen again, you're better prepared and you're able to respond, quicker and faster.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important point. There's a ton of cases out there that I've worked that were where they paid the ransom, they got the decryption key, and then they thought, well, okay, I got my data back, but the bad guys are still on the networks, right? There's all that malware is still sitting there, right? They haven't cleansed the system, and I tell them, look, you need to physically go, pull those blades out of the data center, throw them away, right? Once you've isolated it and start over, right? Rebaseline and start over, because of the ability of some of this malware and this code to remain resident, within these systems in different files, right, is really critical. And I've seen companies get hit, every 6 months for a 2-year period and not put 2 and 2 together that it was actually the same malware that hit them the first time.
Man, talk about adding insult to injury to get hit by the same ransomware a second time. That I wouldn't want to go through that. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, and it's just because, as you point out, they didn't go back and cleanse the system, right? They didn't do that due diligence, and you're right. That is such a critical point of this whole conversation, because it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
So, in your experience, have you ever seen a sort of a best case or a model case of preventing or handling a ransomware attack, and what can we learn from that example?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen, it depends on the company's infrastructure and what they look like, and honestly how much they believe this is going to happen to them, because nobody believes it's going to happen to them, even though you click on the news, you read you look at the internet every day, and there is just another massive either malware attack or ransomware attack. So it's all over the media, and it happens daily, but there are companies that still don't believe it. It's the ones that understand the threat and have actually set up their systems to take care of the right data. I mean, data with this is everything. Bad guys are only after the data, whether they want to steal it or destroy it or encrypt it, and ransom it. Right? It is all about the data. So it's companies that understand that what is the most important data, and then it's the ones that actually have the zero trust. They have multi-factor authentication, and they are able to actually have the backups that are locked in some kind of data vault or some type of a data resiliency plan, where they just move to the next one. Right? They move to that backup. If you don't have all those things, right, and you're just one of those companies, right, you need to call the third parties quickly, right, and you need to honestly, unfortunately, pay the ransom.
Yeah, for me, it all comes down to one word, and that's transparency. If I'm a client of a company that's been hit by ransomware, I want you to just be honest with me about what happened, so that I can take whatever necessary steps I need to take, to protect myself or to recover, whatever funds or services that I need. Don't leave me guessing, or worse, start hiding behind all these cliches and things and stuff like that. Just tell me what happened. And to me, it seems like we've had a real fundamental shift in our industry, where when I first, started as a CISO, if you were the victim of a cyber attack, oh my goodness, you were just roasted in the, in the news about how incompetent you were and how it was all your fault. But I think that attitude has shifted to where people now understand it's going to happen. So you're really judged on, how did you respond? Right? Were you transparent? Did you have a plan? Were you organized? Or were you just trying to play the whole cover-up game? So what do you think about that whole public perception? Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I think it's really critical, the point you just made about being transparent. And I'm also seeing, both from a legislative standpoint, right? So the SolarWinds hack, for example, that's now getting news, right? I'm seeing all kinds of information, tidbits of media coming out about Congress actually starting to either pass laws, talking about that transparency, making sure that if you're doing business, with the federal government, and this takes on the whole supply chain issue as well. You must, respond a certain way, and you must be able to, you must be transparent about that. And the second part is I've actually seen cases where you now have both C-suite and board members who are now becoming personally liable, right? Look at the Yahoo breach, look at the Uber breach, look at the, there's another one I'll think of in a second, that there's actually personal liability on some of these C-suite and board members because they knew it, they didn't talk about it, they kept it to themselves, they weren't transparent with their shareholders, and they covered it up. And that is a huge issue that's being moved forward now. And it's all based on what you just said about being transparent, right? It's not a question of if, it's a question of when, right? I mean, it's gonna happen. And absolutely you need to either respond appropriately, and if you didn't, then learn from it.
And be held personally liable. That's a scary thought. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to that. What else could we learn from some of these examples where maybe they didn't handle the ransomware attack as well as they could? Have you seen any other learning opportunities from almost those worst case scenarios?
Yes, I have, and it's all about the communications piece. I did a lot of cyber wargaming, both in the FBI and then after the FBI. And this is all about communicating on multiple levels, right? So your position on transparency, right? That means many things, right? It's being transparent with the company, right? It's being transparent with the public. I have actually worked cases where you have a ransomware attack that has shut down. It was an organization that had a very large call center. And so imagine this room that is the size of like a Home Depot, right? One of these big, huge rooms. And all you have are tables and desks with computers. And as the call center director is explaining to me his worst day ever, right? He starts to see every one of those screens pop up with the malware banner. You've been infected. And you watch it roll across the like 200 computers that he had in this room. And one of the biggest learning points from that, right? Again, they tried to keep that quiet, right? They tried to tell their employees, it's something, the system's down, we have a network failure, we have something. They weren't honest with their employees. And the reason why the organization, one of those employees, was upset, became a whistleblower, right? So transparency and communicating, the worst case scenario is that you don't say anything, right? And the learning moment from that is you have to be honest with your employees first, right? Because they're the ones that are being either affected or infected sometimes with, their own personal data is in these systems as well. But the communications piece is so critical. And I see that as a huge failure every time and a great learning area.
Definitely. That's good. That's good advice. I would not want to be in that room and see all those screens just start popping up ransomware. It's one of those where you're thinking, maybe I need to find another line of work at that point.
Yeah, that was a bad day.
Yeah, that's a very bad day. When we first started talking, you mentioned some original ransomware going way back, 1990, 1989, I think you said. So where is this going to go from here? What's next for ransomware? What can we expect in the next, 3, 5, 10 years? And what should we be doing to get ahead of that?
So, that's the scary part, where I see it going. And unfortunately, there's been some government leaks that have caused this to be an even bigger problem. So when I'm sitting as the CIO of the FBI, and now you've got some really significant tools that were leaked out of the NSA, right? I'm talking about the Eternal Blue. You've got some vulnerabilities and some tools out there that were leaked, that were utilized by the government, and now you've weaponized. The bad guys out there have weaponized this, and I'm seeing exactly what we thought was going to happen was this proliferation of different types of ransomware and different types of cases. But you also have what's even more alarming is the dark web has both the what I call the storefront of malware, right? I can go on a number of different sites, and for $1,000 a month, I can rent, right, malware code and 30 days worth of botnet time on some system to go attack somebody, for $1,000 a month, which is frightening. You then have organizations out there on the dark web that are actually providing services to the bad guys, actually using tools to scan, their malware to make sure that it doesn't be identified with, any kind of the tools that we're talking about utilizing, from a victim standpoint. And I also see it going with a lot more what I would call blended attacks, where you've got different types of endpoint. It's not just phishing emails, right? It's now it's now endpoint attacks or brute force attacks that are then adding on ransomware or different types of malware. Earlier on, years ago, it was very what I would call one-dimensional, right? You'd have a phishing attack, and you'd have embedded malware with that. Okay, that still happens today, but these organizations, these criminal organizations, are getting more and more sophisticated in how they're doing it, and I see it getting worse way before it gets better.
And that's a scary thought. I know one of the things that I really worry about is this whole concept of deep fake videos. So I'm sure you're familiar with the term, using AI to make a video, of somebody else's face saying something. And what I really worry about is that this is going to become the future of ransomware. I mean, I can certainly see the day when an attacker is going to extort an executive or a company for money saying, I'm going to release this very damaging deep fake video. And, the average person has no idea whether a video is authentic or fabricated. No. And not only that, but just look how fast misinformation can spread across social media. So if I release one of these deep fake videos, even if it's false, it's fake, by the time you can get out there and explain, no, that's not true, that's misinformation, the damage could already be done.
Yeah.
So this is a scary thought, especially as AI starts getting more and more advanced in creating these videos. Are there any other things that have you concerned?
Yeah, so that's a great point with the deep fake videos, and just to kind of take that one step further. So the IoT devices that are out there, whether it's cameras, whether it's right, so every one of those devices, are now right, and there's, I think, some crazy number like by 2025 there'll be 100 billion IoT devices out there connected to the internet. Some crazy number like that. Every one of those is a vulnerability. Everyone can collect some type of information and be part of exactly what you're describing. It's not just a fact of using AI and some tools to create that video. It's to create personas. It's to create complete profiles based on a number of different data types out there. And that's taking that one step further. And again, with all these IoT devices and all of this collection of data, right? You've got the video feeds, you've got audio feeds, you've got data feeds, all from these different types of IoT devices, and every one of them is a vulnerability, right? If you don't lock them down, you're just asking for more problems. And I think that's where this goes, and it takes your excellent example and makes that so much worse.
Yeah, they've already shown that it doesn't matter what type of company you are, what industry you're in. I mean, city governments, universities, you name it, you're fair game for a ransomware attack. And I'm with you. That whole OT environment, critical infrastructure, what if a nation state starts holding somebody's power grid, ransom with a ransomware attack? That's a frightening thought. Now I live in Texas, and after this big winter storm that we had, we certainly realized how dependent we are on technology and on our critical infrastructure.
Yeah, and that's certainly a huge it's a huge threat. It's a huge vulnerability. Certainly if you look at and remember, you don't have to be the intended target. I worked the Maersk case, right? And so, right, the NotPetya ransomware was actually designed by the Russians, and their intended target was the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian power grid, right? But because of the delivery aspect of that, right, through the third party software that was just updated with the ransomware, now you've got Maersk, international shipping company, who's now a victim of this ransomware where they were never the intended target. And you have a complete global supply chain now affected, and you weren't the intended target to begin with. So it is, the critical infrastructure piece is huge.
Yeah. Whew. We've talked about a lot of different tips and tricks and good things to do, not so good things to do. So let's try to wrap this up a little bit. And if there was just one single thing that you could do this year to help better position yourself to either prevent or respond to ransomware, what one thing would that be?
It has to be practice. You mentioned it earlier. You need a war game out and test the parameters of your incident response plan. I mean, hopefully these companies have incident response plans, cyber focused incident response plans. And it's not just about, it's what I call pressure testing the system, right? Because again, businesses are great at business. They're not necessarily great at crisis. And those are two entirely different things. Having run international crisis situations through my FBI career, I can tell you that it's two entirely different things. And it's really pressure testing both the process, right, and the people. So it's terrible, but you have to pressure test it.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And that's, I like to use an analogy to help drive that point home. If you think about basketball, a basketball player will practice shooting free throws during practice. In some cases, they'll shoot 50, 100 free throws in practice. And a free throw is only worth 1 point. So why doesn't a company spend more time and effort practicing their response to a ransomware incident, especially when that ransomware incident could cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars? I just don't understand it. Just simply pulling out your incident response plan and reading through it is not an exercise. It's not a test. So I agree with you completely.
And it's honestly having, and using, leveraging, breach and attack simulation, either techniques or opportunities. You're never going to get a chance if you don't practice. You're never going to get a chance to go back and do that prior to that incident. And it is right. And honestly, for those companies who have had it, they're in an even worse place if they've not learned. Right. I always say, never let a good crisis go to waste. Right. This is an opportunity for you to look at how you did plan or how you did practice. How was that process of information? And let me go back to the whole communications piece. what was the process of that communications flow from the information technology part of the organization to the C-suite, right? To the board when it's appropriate, and because that's a two-way communications path. And this has to be, I tell boards this all the time, this has to be a holistic organizational philosophy, right? Mailroom to boardroom, boardroom to mailroom, right? I've worked cases where, the lowest level employee in the organization clicked the link and launched the ransomware, right? I've worked cases where the CEO clicked the link and launched the ransomware, right? It happens to everybody, right? And so it has to be a holistic plan and it has to be practiced.
Absolutely. Well, James, I could sit here and chat with you all day and pick your brain. It's great. It's great talking to you, and we're very fortunate to have you on Team Optiv. It's been a lot of fun. And if you would like to learn more about what Optiv can do to help you, not just with ransomware, but with all your cybersecurity challenges, just reach out to info@optiv.com. And James, I look forward to talking with you again soon.
Yeah, so happy to be here. Thank you so much. This was great.